So Galatians 5, 7 through 15. Paul is angry with the Galatians because a group of people have come in and told him that, basically told the Gauls and Galatians that grace isn't sufficient and that they need to obey rules of the law, such as dietary restrictions and cutting of the body, aka circumcision and this type of things. Probably not eating food sacrificed to idols, etc., etc. And Paul is upset. They've also clearly stated that Paul wasn't a real apostle because he never walked with Jesus, and that he was preaching a tickly-eared gospel. You know, and that's what I like. I like when I get accused of preaching stuff that tickles people's ears or trying to be a people pleaser. I'm like, well, that's what they accused Paul of. So that's good. A few weeks ago, I had somebody tell me online, like, you should listen to Jay's thing on Jay's study on Galatians. It's a little rambly, but then again, so was Paul. So I just said I was a rambling man. As you can tell, I like to ramble. If I didn't ramble, everything would be like 10 minutes. That's just, you know, I want you guys to get your money's worth. Which is nothing, so. 7. You were running well. Who prevented you from obeying the truth? Such persuasion does not come from the one who calls you. Now, I like this. Who kept you from obeying the truth? Basically, he's saying, you're doing extra stuff, so you're not obeying the truth. You know, you're not eating certain things, you're celebrating certain holidays, and you're doing this because you think salvation requires more than it does, so you're not obeying the truth. Now, I had to find this out in my life when I was around 20-something years old, that I was not obeying the truth because I thought God hated me and wanted nothing to do with me. And so I would try to jump through every hoop possible. I would try to pray as long as I could. When I couldn't think of things to say, I would just make up words and probably call it speaking in tongues, but, you know, I don't know if it was genuine or not, to be honest with you. I just, you know, I hate that I can't tell you if that was right or wrong. But, you know, to each his own, to each her own, will you? But you are obeying the truth. Such persuasion does not come from the one who calls you. So being persuading you to do all these works doesn't come from Jesus. A little yeast, I love how they use this in good and negative ways. A little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough. So a little legalism spreads very far in the church, and I find that to be very true. Even more so, I think critique has spreads quickly in the church. And I don't mean like necessarily loving critique. I think sometimes that's the way it goes, but I think often it's just, you know, it's like when, who were the two guys who got Nixon? Anybody remember the two reporters? This is a history lesson. You don't remember that? Who? Woodward and Bernstein is the correct answer. Oh, and it's from the top. Woodward and Bernstein, thank you, see? Woodward and Bernstein, and then after that, everybody became like an investigative reporter. You know, and so now we have like Extra, and like, what's that, you know, the other show where they're like following people around, and you know, I'm a lawyer. The Harvey guy, I can't remember his show either. But, you know, the rag magazines of the 80s and everything, because everybody was like all of a sudden like, we're going to investigate everything. If you put anyone's life under a microscope, you're going to find shit. Because shit is part of life, period. That's just the way it goes. You know? And if you could do it when people were alone, or you get into their mind, it would even be worse. But people are messy. Period. And sometimes we get overzealous, and we become not the Internal Revenue Service, but internal affairs. We become like the cop, the police, the preachers, heretic hunters, and all these things. And I always found it funny, like you could tell like what side of history the heretic hunter, what type of theology they were in, and by who they went after. Because I remember there's this one really famous heretic hunter named Hank Hanegraaff, I think his name was. But he loved my dad. But he loved my dad because he was an evangelical. So he didn't think that my dad was a heretic because my dad was an evangelical, when most of the world, felt that way, didn't feel that way. And then sometimes you'll see very liberal people who are heretic hunters, and you will realize that their heretics are often very conservative. And so I like to say heresy is in the eyes of the beholder. I know I'm not a heretic. I know I am a heretic because I don't hold a genuine popular view of Christianity. That's really all it means. The most popular view. But it's just funny to see who we go after and who we decide and with what fervor we use. A little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough. So he's talking about, but Paul's talking about legalism at this point. He's saying these guys have come in and said, I'm not good enough because I'm not telling you to do enough. Because I've told you the only way to Christ is through Christ. Grace is sufficient, that kind of thing. 10 says, I am confident about you and the Lord that you will not think otherwise. But whoever it is that is confusing you will pay the penalty. But my friends, why am I still being persecuted if I am still preaching circumcision? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. So he's saying, I'm being persecuted because I'm not preaching circumcision. And these guys came in and they're saying ear tickler because he wasn't preaching it. But he's saying in that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. Like when we start to think we have something to do with it, and I think we have something to do with growing and maturing and becoming human beings and learning lessons. But as far as grace is concerned, it's free. And you can walk around and be an idiot if you want to. That is the stumbling block of the cross. Loving your enemy, doing good to those who persecute you, treating others how you'd want to be treated, is the stumbling block of Christianity. So when you think about it, it's good news, but it will cause you to stumble every time, because when Jesus said, love your enemy, he did not mean the person, who talks too long to the cashier while you're waiting in line. He meant the Roman soldier who's forcing you to carry the pack and might stab you in the chest when you decide to offer to carry it an extra mile. Or the soldier, when you turn the other cheek, might just beat the shit out of you till you're dead. This is loving your enemy. The fact that we have toned down the idea of what loving our enemy is and doing good to those who persecute us makes me really upset and sick. And it makes Christianity become this huge, distorted event. Because we don't love our enemies. We don't even know what our enemies are. We make enemies out of hearsay, out of small things that we're not even sure are true, and destroy them. And I watched it happen with my family. There were some things that were true, but most of it wasn't true. I watched them go through that. I'm sharing from my own lenses, my own experience, because that's what often theologians and preachers do. Unfortunately, there's no pure theology out there. I wish I knew there was, or pure science for that fact. You're always going to have the human error in there. So, the cross is useless to those of us who feel that we have to continue to add things. I don't think it means that, all these people are going to hell, because to be honest with you, I don't actually believe in hell, so that's not an issue for me. See, there's the heresical part. I struggle often, though, with the fact that I don't believe in hell, but still believe in heaven. you know. But ultimately, if it's all just bunk, I still really like this book, and it's really challenged my life. And I have doubts and questions just like everybody else does. I just say them out loud as much as I can to try to keep myself somewhat, well, now just sane. I used to do it to keep myself humble. Now I do it to keep myself sane and honest. Now, Paul here has a different kind of view of this, though, and Paul gets a little upset here. And let's look at what he has to say. So he goes, but my friends, why am I still being persecuted if I am still preaching circumcision? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. I wish those who unsettle you would castrate themselves. Okay. Do we all know what castration is? It's a little bit further down than the normal circumcision. It's a little bit much. It's taking the cigar cutter and going a little bit further down. And maybe a rubber band for a few weeks. Oh, bad visual. But that's what he's talking about. He's saying, I wish they would cut their balls off. I wish they could no longer reproduce. I wish they would castrate themselves. This is the rage that Paul is feeling. The problem with today is everybody's mad at everybody, so you could just get, well, yeah, I'm mad at you spiritually because I'm spiritual. I'm mad at you. You know, he said and she said and they said. It's so hard to get a reaction out of anybody. But you can imagine when they're reading this from their spiritual leader who's like, I told you grace was enough. Matter of fact, these guys who aren't telling you, who are lying to you, I wish they'd castrate themselves. Sometimes I feel that about anti-LGBTQ folks, because they put impossible standards on to gay people with the struggle that they've never had, with the feelings they've never gone through, and they say, don't be this, it's wrong, and it's abomination. It's like, really, it's easy for you to stay where you're standing from. Now, often they're fighting their own demons, but then at other times, I don't think it's a sin to be gay also, so there's another part of what people consider me a heresy, but that heresy is slowly turning into non-heresy, which I'm glad to see happen. You know, because I see kids kill themselves. I see the fruit of the anti-gay movement, and the ex-gay movement is suicide, broken homes, homelessness, self-hate. I don't see peace, patience, kindness, joy. I don't see that. So either, you know, so I wonder if people just, I always wonder how we grasp that, because like, well, Paul says it over here, this thing in Romans 1. Okay, well, I'm saying we have way more experience and knowledge than just Romans 1, and it's not working. Matter of fact, well, pick up your cross. Well, you know, basically you're saying pick up your cross, then use it. Like get up and die. You know, and I don't see that, because to me it misses the point. We've evolved, we've grown, our knowledge, our ideas have grown. So Paul says he's so pissed that he wants these people to castrate themselves. And I do feel that way. I'll tell you, I don't think social media has made me a better person. I'm not going to lie. I wish I could. I'm a much better person. You know why I stay on social media? That's because I want to have a career left. I want to be able to say, hey, I don't have any books coming out. But when I do, if I did, I want to have a book coming out. Hey, we're having Revolution. Come on, check out a service. Let's hang out. You know, or recommend a book. Or, hey, I'm going on tour. Or, hey, I'm speaking at this thing. You know, I like that. But often, it becomes a place of darkness and craziness, and I have to control my fingers, because I just want to just spew the hate back, you know, and then it just blows up. It's like funny, like you can't run from it anymore. You can't just, you know, it's everywhere. So I have to die to my fingers daily. Because sometimes I feel this type of anger, but what Paul's feeling is an anger of people being sucked back into a law that they can never fit into. Legalism made sense, especially at this point, because people were used to a sacrificial system. Matter of fact, Christianity looked like it was based on a human sacrificial system, as Jesus being a human sacrifice. So people are so stuck in this idea of sacrificial systems that to them it makes sense. And Paul's going, who still believes in a sacrificial system, is still going, but he's saying that Jesus was the last sacrifice, period. That was it. You guys got to get this. And They didn't like it because we always want to somehow personalize it or make it about ourselves or have an enemy. Could you imagine if we had a faith that didn't have an enemy? One time someone asked online, what does a mature faith look like? And I said, one that doesn't have an enemy. I don't have a mature faith yet, but looks like everybody's looking for somebody. It's either like, oh, we're being, I see all these Christians saying, we're being discriminated against, and we're being forced to bake pies for gay people, which is like crazy, because it's like usually middle-class white people who are Christians who are like, okay, well, you follow the biggest faith, you're the biggest group of people in the United States, you are middle class, you're not being persecuted against, you're white middle class Christians, and I don't even bet you don't even own a pie store. I just want to get up and say the American Pledge of Allegiance. I don't know what they want and what they think stopping, but it's funny. I was having a conversation with this guy, and he goes, I have lots of gay friends, and I was on Facebook, and so I said, oh, well, that's great. Let's get them in on the conversation and see what they have to say. And then he just all of a sudden his stuff was deleted. I don't know if he doesn't have the gay friends, if he's lying, or if he got convicted. I don't know what happened, but it's just strange to me that we play such games with each other, and it does get you angry. And then you've got the folks who have been hurt by the church, and anyone involved in the church becomes the enemy. Now this is the one that I relate to very well, because in my early career, I was very angry at the church. It didn't matter how progressive you were. I wanted to know, why didn't you help my parents when they fell, and what about restoration, and where was all this crap? And so I was angry constantly. But what I also found out is anger ate me up inside, made me a better person, didn't like to be around people. People didn't like to be around me. I still don't like to be around people that much, only because I found out that I'm extremely introverted. It's not that I don't like to be around people, I just have to energize myself. But back then, I was angry, and I was bitter, and it spread. And I realized often that people around me were angry and bitter. And it became a toxic thing. And guess what happened when I let them down? Guess who they became angry and bitter at when I didn't live up to their expectations as a pastor? Me. I became the enemy. And guess what sometimes happened to them? They became my enemy. And what I realized is, okay, this isn't getting me anywhere fast either. Constantly being angry at people. But this is the case, is Paul's dealing with this, and this is what's going on, and I don't know, we got to find it, and you'll see why I'm saying all this, because there are 2 points of 2 particular areas of this, and it wasn't the castration part that I want to focus on in Galatians 5, even though I do find the castration part to be a little funny. For you are called in freedom, brothers and sisters, only not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgences. Now I want to think about the opportunity for self-indulgences. People will use this to mean what they want it to mean. Okay? And they'll say, oh, you're using grace for yourself. Indulgences. Like most people I grew up with thought that meant like having sex and drinking beer and looking at porn and listening to rock and roll music. Okay, that's the evangelicals I grew up with. Then I found out a lot of my mainline people were like, oh, that just means you're not going to help the poor, and you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. And so I found there was 2 different sides to what self-indulgence was too. Isn't it weird? It's so confusing. Because there's so many of us, and we split into so many different sects over the time, that we don't even know what self-indulgence is anymore. Well, it's something that indulges oneself, I guess. And it can be a mountain of anything, but what we can have is common sense. We can take a look. It's when we become selfish. Okay, let's look at that. So, we've been given freedom, but not freedom to be selfish. But Paul goes on to say, but through love, become slaves to one another. Jesus said, love your enemies, do good to them. Jesus said, I did not come to rule over it. Yeah, I said, I've come to serve. And Jesus, remember, he tied the blanket around it, his robe around his waist, and he got on his hands and knees, and he washed the feet. And Peter was like, no, don't wash my feet. How dare you? And he's like, I have come to be called to be a servant. And he goes, "I'll then wash my whole body." And then Jesus looks, "Trust me, feet's enough." Okay. I've always liked that. Jesus just smacking Peter around constantly. "No, we'll do my whole body." "No, Peter, relax. It's just your feet." And you know, Peter's kind of radical too. He's like, "I don't know the man." That's the kind of people Jesus uses, though, and I like that. But through love, become a slave to one another. Become slaves to one another. Now, it's not like they did not understand the slavery system. They did. They had slaves. Okay? But he's saying in love. Serve one another in love. Go as though your life depended on it in love. Put yourself at risk to love people. Now, I'm not saying that this is a requirement for anything, but I want to say if you want to live a life well lived, a life that's full of grace and full of joy and peace and patience and kindness and generosity and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control, these are the type of things you're able to do, is love. Let love become something that causes you to serve others. So for me, my evangelical friends who don't want to bake cakes for my LGBTQ brothers and sisters, for them, I think they should say, not only am I going to bake you a cake, I am going to bake you 2 cakes. Unless you want 3, then I'll bake 4. Not only am I going to photograph your wedding, I'm going to film it, Betamax it, Cinemax, I don't know. We're going to do everything. We're going to get this thing down. We're going to get court people in here, the drawers, you know, who draw them. And we're going to have the court artists, and they're going to draw your whole wedding. That's how far we're going to go because we love you. And for us who have issues with our legalistic friends, we've got to find a way. Yes, we don't want their message to go out and destroy others. So how do we serve them in love, but at the same time go, we feel like you're destroying each other? And I think, you know, my dad once said to me, he's like, I said, "Dad," he's like, I was telling him why I was so upset with Franklin Graham and stuff. And he's like, and he's like, "Well, you got to give them grace." I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm saying it out of love." And he's like, "Well, they'll say the same thing." I'm like, "Yeah, but let's look at the fruit of what they're saying versus what I'm saying. My fruit is somebody gets married and lives together for the rest of life, and maybe gets divorced. Who knows? But their fruit is someone who's denying their sexuality, denying themselves companionship for the rest of their life. And as we know now, like I said before, it leads to broken homes, suicide, and these type of things. So can we be logical and look at action versus reaction? Because that's what fruit is. You know, seeds go into the ground, and it either becomes fruit or it doesn't. You know, so we're trying to see what is the fruit of this situation. Then it gets into, okay, 14. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And I just don't understand how we do that. Because I see how we act and we talk about each other. I know I sound like a broken record, but destroying one another on hearsay and half-truths, to me, is not good stuff. Have you ever heard of in psychology something called splitting? And a lot of us do it. I do it often, but some of us do it more than others. It's, let's say you go through a divorce, and which I have gone through a divorce, and I go to one of our mutual friends, "Oh, she's evil, and she did this to me, and it's all her fault, and I can't believe it, and she set me up, and now I'm, you know, my whole life's falling apart because she's a horrible, evil woman, and she didn't know how to love, and blah, blah, blah." So that's me saying she was bad, and then, you know, like, and I'm just an innocent victim. I'm good, okay? One side's good, other side's bad. Now, if I'm to be honest with you, I will tell you that I was bad at a lot of things as a husband, as far as like paying bills on time. So all of a sudden she took over the bills. I wasn't great at doing dishes and cleaning, so she was doing a lot of the cleaning. I mean, there was two parts to the story. I mean, yes, I would have given her anything I could, but there were situations in the marriage that, you know, and not that either of those two things are like worth divorce or anything. That wasn't why we got divorced. But there was just, looking back on some of those things, my communication skills, codependency, you know, there wasn't a good guy or a bad guy in the marriage. There were two people who had a lot of issues, and maybe one did something more than the other. I don't know, but the fact is no one could take 100% of the blame. But we like to have things black and white. We like to split things. And that gets us in a bad place. I'm so tired of our, you know, of the so-called do-gooders trying to destroy people by creating false narratives and false motivations. I just see it all the time. And it's just so easy to convince yourself you're always right. I just don't know when we'll learn how to see. And I can't say, well, can't we get along on like these issues and focus on these issues? You know? I don't understand how we can throw each other under the bus when we can realize that people spent their whole lives trying to love people and care about people. Someone asked me about my mom recently and my dad and you know, how they got to where they went. I'm like, you know, they never started out to have a mega church and be like these crazy preachers who like had to raise millions of dollars every 2 days. They started out as two young ministers who were like on fire for what they did, and they worked around the clock. You know, they were the janitors, and they were the people who set up the chairs, and they would do the camera work and the sound stuff and the preaching. My dad just thought, oh, well, you know, the TV was kind of his internet at the time, you know, and they were radio preachers before, and what a better way to use that. And I loved it when I listened to guys who put all their sermons online, and they're like, oh, those TV preachers. I'm like, I wouldn't go so fast. Just because yours is just audio, you're still asking for money. It's just on an audio version online, so somehow it's different. The fact is to build a bigger monster, you have to pay more bills. That's why a lot of mainline churches are selling off their property. And a lot of these TV preachers are cutting salaries and people are getting paid. I've actually been to a couple, I've met this one megachurch in particular, and they have 3 or 4 services. And when I was at one of the services, it was like empty. But what not empty, but much lower. But what I realized is what they did is they edited in different services, and so the crowd would always look full. Isn't that weird? So you kind of get that image of success. So we are successful. Now, I'm not saying that that's, I really could care less if you're editing in the audience. I don't care. Because honestly, that's not, if I'm loving you as myself, I'm going to go like, okay, your ego got to your head a little bit. You feel the need for everybody, you know, you feel that need. I understand. I've been there. I'm not going to destroy you over that. But there's some people who be like, that, we got to destroy them because they're lying through television. You know? I'm not going to try to destroy overly happy TV preachers because they preach too much about happiness, you know, because I'm like, you know, I can understand that as well too. The health and wealth stuff gets to me a little bit, but the fact is there's so much bad news out there that you know, I'm just saying there's other things more worth our time. Or we could just start another denomination and another group of Christians and just split off, and we'll be where they're true. I mean, that's what it is. That's what denominations are. A group of people who got together and said, we are better than those people because they've got this and this wrong. They're wrong, and we're right on this issue, so that issue becomes the split issue. Follow me along? Splitting, and then all of a sudden they create their thing. Sit down with the Southern Baptists and find out why they're the Southern Baptists. Not a proud moment. Find out a lot of these, I can't wait 20, 30 years down the road and the people who split off the ELCA, and we can say, oh, you started because you didn't like gay people in your church. That wasn't comfortable. That must be fun. The churches that started because of discrimination, well, we didn't want to marry black and white people in our church, so we became this church. And now they're like, oh, I don't, the history of our church, we don't really have a manual on it anymore. Kind of revision that. But that's what happens. And that spirit often sticks. Because we're ready to dig our heels in over being exclusive rather than inclusive. And we split. And we split, and we split, and we split. Now, I will admit to you that part of this sermon comes from something I read about one of my good friends recently. And it was upsetting. And it was bullshit. There might have been little truth here, but for the most part it was crap. And I just going like, how do you judge someone's whole life based on an opinion on something that they think differently, that you will go and try to destroy their career and tell me that it's being an activist? I also speak from my own experience and seeing what happened to my parents. Knowing that the only happy time we had, really, because I wasn't too happy before we lost everything, was probably a few months where we lived in a small 2-bedroom house, and I went to school, and my mom packed my lunches and stuff, and we were a little family. Only thing that was unfortunate is that my sister wasn't there at the time. But then my dad was like, we got to get the church back. And so then he spent the rest of his life wanting to get the church back, and I thought everything would be okay, so we just got the church back. And that wasn't a happy time either. So I don't even sometimes wonder, people go like, why do you still do what you do? And I'm like, grace is so good. And then I think, wait a second, why do I still do this? Because there sure is a lot of damn distractions. Is this thing on? Just kidding. Good versus bad is just, it's something we hear in Sunday school, or it's something we're told in little stories. And there's a reason we like our heroes now to be darker and confused and screwed up and having conflicts, because people are realizing life is so much more difficult, and so it's not that easy to figure out, and life is full of grays. So much is gray, There are good and there are bad people out there. And the us versus them is just the fact is that them are good and us are good, and them are bad and us are bad. But we want to split somehow and think that we found and that's what happens when you stop noticing that you can't love your neighbor as yourself. That's when you start noticing that you can't love another believer at all because of the one issue. And I will tell you, I got an issue in my head when people go like, it's hard for me when people go like, no, I think gay marriage, I think being gay is a sin. And it's hard for me not to be like, voila, all right, see you guys later. The very same thing they did when I came out and said, I don't think being gay is a sin. Their wall went up, and their wallets went back into their pocket. It was really strange how that happened. But it's hard for me not to return the favor, rather than saying, how can we talk about this? Now, luckily, I've been involved with groups like Soul Force and things like that, where they've helped teach me how to do nonviolent conversations and how to have confrontation without violence and without cruel words, and doing nonviolence of the mouth and the heart as much as the fists. And that's helped out a lot. Good organization can help with that. Why am I focusing on the church today? Because I think Paul is doing that right here. Do I think that we can take these ideas to a broader horizon? Yes. But Paul right here is talking about a church that is super screwy. Things are screwed up. He's left and things have gone awry. A wire, a higher. What have they gone? Anybody? What's the word I'm looking for? Gone haywire. Gone haywire? Yeah, let's go to haywire. Don't you hate it when hay gets in your wire and then it starts a fire? And forget if it's near a tire. Okay, that was my rhyme for today. All right, now, simplification often leads to destruction in people's lives, and often wars. Think about propaganda, old propaganda posters, and think about how people look in those. Or like propaganda posters in the South in the 50s and 60s. Think about how folks of color look in that. Think about how Asians look in when we were, in war. Think about how even Germans, we made Germans, it was really tough for us to make Germans, so we just made them look very dark and scary. We made them look like Darth Vader, But everybody else we would just make a caricature of, right? Because they were all bad, and they all had secrets. To the point where we even created camps here in America for some of those folks when we were at war with them, because we didn't want them messing with us. And that's the simplest way to do it. That is the simplest way to say, oh, these people want to destroy your peace of mind and steal your serenity. So we're the good people, and they're the bad people. Matter of fact, look at how scary they look in their posters. And we have these posters, the posters right here. This is why you should join the fight. That's how, the church, that Baptist, I don't even remember if it's Baptist or not, the church that God hates gays, Westboro Baptist, started because he saw two men having sex in a park, and he thought that was what being gay was, and the next thing you know, there's going to lead to being men in every park in the world having sex in front of people and then molesting children, and so then he lost his mind and got full of hate and went to a park. It fell apart. That's kind of where his mind went, because he used to work in civil rights, but somewhere along the line his brain went and clipped, and he thought, they're all bad and I am good. To the point that one day when I'm burying my mother, I see these guys holding signs saying my mother's in hell. Literally. It's splitting. We like to use that severeness, but sometimes that severeness is even easier because at least with that, seeing that, we know that they're cuckoo and crazy. Sometimes it comes in the idea of righteousness and self-righteousness, and when it comes from a bleeding heart, liberal folks like ourselves, probably most of us in this room, we can make it look like the high road, and it can get confusing. And this is why I want to say all this, is because Paul's second statement says, he asks that you shall love your neighbor as yourself, but he goes, if however you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. If you bite and devour one another, be careful that you are not consumed by one another. I always think of that, sticks and stones might break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And for me, it's like the opposite of that. Sticks and stones may break my bones, and yeah, they hurt, but words always hurt. We don't assassinate people anymore. We character assassinate. We make them look bad and destroy them with our words. And we're all guilty of it. And Paul is saying, love your neighbor as your, love each other. Be slaves to love. And if you don't, guess what? You need to be really ready for you to destroy one another. Let's go back to Star Wars. Darth Vader was destroyed. But I don't think Luke really came out like the healthiest person in the world. He's missing a hand. He just had this horrible fight with his father. His father is now somehow okay because he's a spirit ghost and everything's cool, And he just found out a girl that he kissed twice is his sister. All right? There's some issues there. Am I right? Okay, maybe that's not the best example. But I use Darth Vader as an example of grace and why people don't like it. I mean, he blew up a whole freaking planet. And then, like, he saved his kid, and he was like, oh, you're okay. You get to be a spirit ghost. You get to be just like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who spent his whole life watching over this kid on a desert who was a badass Jedi and had no badass Jedi stuff to do, and got called Crazy Ben. Anybody? No? It's sorry, everybody, you can't hear the laughter because we have the mic cover on. And there's 7 of us in here. But by the time this airs, there will be 14 of us. I'll double the crew with editing. So I just think if we continue to try to make our faith a moral system of us versus them, we lose. If we keep simplification, we lose. If we decide to throw everyone under the bus because they have a different opinion or they stand with the wrong person, we lose. I think we could learn from people. I think MLK has a lot to teach us. Because what if Martin Luther King Jr. was just, I mean, another leader would have risen, I'm sure. But what if he would have just been like, screw those guys, I don't care. I mean, even Malcolm X was like, we're going to have to live separately. But then what happened? He went to Mecca. And he saw everybody together, and then all of a sudden he goes, okay, maybe we don't need to leave separately, but there's still things need to change. Look at Gandhi and what Gandhi did. These are guys who changed my life. These are also guys who had caricatures made of them because they were totally bad. Do you know what they never did? They didn't return the favor of making other people totally bad. Now, of course, in private, they told jokes and they had laughs and they dealt with it because humans have to deal with shit. We're human. Again, we're human beings. But the fact is you don't live your life by going to the level of other people. And you have to realize that you can't say, only bad people, only the bad people split. See what you're doing there? All of a sudden you're splitting again and not realizing it. And Pete was joking with me. He's like, yeah, bad people split and good people don't. I was like, perfect. But that's splitting. This group is bad, this group is good. And what you do is you start to see there's good and bad people, there's bad and good people. It's just sometimes they're in different levels. And, I bet you if you tried hard enough, you could even find something nice that Hitler did. He could paint, I don't know. He gave his children poison chocolate. Could have used baseball bats instead. I don't know. Hitler's a hard one, okay? I'm going to just go say that's a hard one to go with. Because everybody's always like, he's pure evil. But no one's pure evil. People are just, I'm sure when he was a little kid, he wasn't like, oh my gosh, he's just killing all the ants out there and he's horrible and evil. It was probably something that happened over time. Probably had something to do with a lot of people in his life who split things. You look at people like Mel Gibson and then you realize that his father was like this Holocaust denier and all this stuff. You start to go, okay, he grew up really wacky. When he gets drunk, he says some stuff that's really not appropriate. But is he completely horrible? Well, according to the media and most, people who hire him for jobs, he's completely horrible because the guy doesn't work a lot. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying it's just so easy to do that. So why be Christians if we're going to do that? Why follow something that we've never seen and say we love something that we've never seen nor can prove? I mean, the fact that we believe that a God somewhere and beyond our understanding decided to come down to earth to a poor carpenter and a town, to a virgin woman, and not really explain to anybody else that, hey, she's a virgin and giving birth. To most people, they were fooling around before they got married, and he's from the wrong place, and he's the wrong side of tracks. And he's also God, and he's also man at the same time. And he can heal people. He can heal blind people sometimes by just touching them, and other times he has to spit in the dirt and make mud. Oh, and then guess what? He dies, and then he comes back to life in 3 days. And some people recognize him, and some people don't. But his holes are still there for Thomas. You know what I'm saying? Okay, point is that we believe some crazy shit, and if we're going to believe it, and we're going to have, lately I've said I don't believe it anymore. I have faith in it. That's all I can have. As best as faith. But the fact that this faith, if I'm going to have this faith and share this faith with others, why am I not going to do the best things as trying to love people? If you want a system that requires sacrifice, the actual sacrifice is in loving your enemies. It has nothing to do with killing your own son or Jesus dying on the cross or any of that stuff. What it has to do with is a system of loving your neighbor as yourself, and then of course, like any good religious leader, they're like, who's my neighbor? Hoping that Jesus will be like, just the guy to the right and left of you. And then that's it. You know? And then he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. So guess what? Those are the hard, that's taking up your cross. I don't know if it's required, but I certainly know it could make the world a better place. And I know the people who did it, who didn't subscribe to our religion and our faith, have made the world a better place. And I'm tired of biting and devouring. I'm tired of shaming. I'm tired of this stuff. I want to see a restorative gospel. And one that doesn't require some human being to come to me and say, I did wrong and I'm bad and all this. I want to see me to go, no, it's taken care of. Forget about it. I understand. And if it has to be more complicated than that, then we can sit down and talk about it. You know? And every situation is going to be different. We're going to handle, you know, someone who murdered someone is going to be definitely different than someone who preached something mean. You know? But the fact is these are still situations that we can deal with. The fact is God still cares about the guy who pulled the trigger as much as he does the guy who got the trigger. I had a friend of mine screwing with me the other day. He's like, oh, do you feel bad that God loves everybody just as much as you and you're not special, blah, blah, blah. And I thought about it over an evening the next day when I saw the person. No, you know what? I think that's pretty awesome. I think it's pretty awesome that God loved Hitler just as he loved Mitch, as he loved me. Because that's just bizarre and crazy to me. That is more bizarre and crazy to me than resurrection or blind seeing. Okay? I don't understand. Maybe when I become a parent, I'll understand it better. So, the point is Paul's talking to these guys in Galatians. They're upset. And he's just saying, listen, I'm really mad at these guys. But what's really important is you guys loving each other and be careful of biting and devouring one another. Even Paul is using a very strong word letter. We see his hypocrisy along with his sainthood. He's a sinner and a saint at the same time. We see it. One minute he wants their balls cut off, and the next minute he's saying, but be careful. Don't destroy each other. And that's the good news. Thank you. Thanks for coming to Revolution. We will not be meeting until probably the second weekend in August again, because they have some event here. But I'll let you know online. So, good to see you.